welcome to episode 8 of the Dr. Stephen Greer podcast. Dr. Greer, it's great to be with you today.
Good seeing you.
I understand.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. I understand you want to kick it off with an update.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a great deal that's happened in the last week or 5 days. We are progressing rapidly with a law enforcement effort at a very high level. I've been asked I can speak to this to inform the public and make an appeal for more evidence and whistleblowers, but I cannot go into the details of the operation. These are folks I've been working with for a couple years. There is now a great momentum that has picked up in the last couple of months, and it's quite a development. So what I want to say is that we have handed over a few dozen whistleblowers that have come to and through us over the last couple of years. This has resulted in significant leads and the expansion through their own investigation of many other assets, confirming both the conspiracy, the criminal activity, wet works murders, and things of this sort related to UAP operations and cover-up. We're at the point now where there's a clear mandate to move this forward fairly quickly in the coming months. And I want to be very careful in explaining this to people. It may sound a little technical, but I want everyone to hear it. And then I want you to spread this all over the internet, particularly if you are in a network of people who have been military, JSOC, special forces, corporate, aerospace, or others, government agencies that might have had anything to do with this issue over the last 70 years, 65 years. Why do I put that date on it? It was in the late 1950s that we can establish that the operations dealing with UFOs were separated from the control of the executive, the president of the United States, and also from key oversight in the Congress. Because of that, any activity from that point on can be prosecuted, because when it's an ongoing conspiracy, there is no limits. In other words, there's no, what's the term that's used? Statute of limitations. Normally a statute, let's say if you've committed robbery or some other crime, there is a statute of limitations, not on murder, but on many others. But when it's an ongoing criminal enterprise, the clock doesn't stop, right? For that reason, anybody with information or who was involved 60 years ago, maybe they're in their 80s, can come forward. And if they have material, documents, videos, photographs, physical, all of it can be protected, and the people can be now fully immunized. But it's conditional. So let me be very, very clear on this. Your immunization, where you can never be prosecuted for any of this, is contingent on full disclosure of all information you possess and recall. Names, places, code names of operations, project locations, everything. Anything withheld will terminate your immunity agreement. So I want to be very clear on this. It means that you can't tell a half-truth. You can't withhold information. But if you're honest and come forward with integrity, you'll be completely protected. Now that is operational, and I encourage people, if we're ever going to unravel this and solve this problem for our nation and for the world, now's the time to do it. There's a window. Obviously, it's dangerous. There have been a number of threats and problems that have occurred around what we're doing. There has been loss of life over the last couple of years. Everybody knows what we've gone through and I've gone through, but now is the time to move with alacrity and clarity. So I'm putting this call out for people to come forward, and it doesn't matter whether you're currently involved, at a lower level or a higher level, or whether you were involved back decades ago, it's all covered and you need to come forward. Now, here's the flip side of that. Because in a conspiracy charge, the left hand doesn't have to know what the right hand's doing. So let's say you were a special forces operator at facility X, right? And if you go to our briefing document in our archive, you'll see we have almost 160 sites where these operations have been ongoing that we know about. And you might have been a 20, 30-year-old person. You certainly thought that what you were doing was legal, but it wasn't. Here's the problem. Because you were embedded unknowingly in an operation like that, technically you're liable. There's a liability for having involved in these programs, and particularly now that it's being made known, where I'm basically the public face of it, to say you can be immunized. You're covered for anything that may have happened or that you saw happen that you didn't report, and your slate is wiped clean. But if you withhold information, it's later found you were involved, this is a problem for you individually, for that person. So because this has become that serious, where it has been concluded that there are serious high crimes that have occurred, this is the time to come forward, because there's a clear pathway. You can contact us at drstephengreer.com, and there on that website, there's a toolbar for witnesses. You can hit it, contact us. You'll be kept in complete confidentiality from the public, unless and until you want to go public. And we will then hand that information to the people who can both protect you and utilize your information to solve this problem that has been ongoing for 70 years. So that's a very big development that's become more clarified, let's say, and it's also become a more robust effort over the last few months. And I would strongly encourage people to network in your circles, family, friends, social media, work, what have you, to see if there are people who have information who want to come forward, because they can be completely immunized from anything that they saw and didn't report, which, by the way, is also a crime, or were part of directly. So I think it's very important for people to use this opportunity to come forward. And what we want this to be is from a few dozen or maybe 100 or two prospective living people, that it grows to a few thousand, all the way up the chain of command, all the way up. And that's how you do this. The other thing that's very important is that names, places, dates, code names of projects, all very important, because to unravel this, keep in mind, the constitutional government of the United States, until we started providing very detailed information a few years ago, really didn't know where the washroom was on this. They didn't know the most senior people, for example, at Senate Intelligence and at the Pentagon I've met with, didn't know where these subterranean facilities or dumb underground bases are, deep underground military bases. They didn't know about the NRO satellites that had been weaponized with neutrino light detectors. They didn't know about the underground connector system that goes from Edwards to Nellis Air Force Base, et cetera. So things that people who followed our work and this subject for years, believe it or not, the senior people in the U.S. government, they were there until very recently. They were asking the question, do UAPs and UFOs even exist, and what are they, right? So 3 years ago, when I first entered the SCIF for the Senate Intelligence Committee, that's where they were. Now it's gone way beyond that, and it's crossed out of congressional sausage making, let's say, over into serious law enforcement investigation and pursuit. So it's a big development, and we're asking for people to help us. It's certainly something that is an opportunity also for people who have been And I know, this is what's being discussed with some very senior operators who've been involved in projects that are clearly illegal, up to including wet works, murder, kidnapping, abductions, human trafficking, the whole nasty business involving UAPs and UFOs. Those folks are, going to be able to be completely immunized so long as they disclose everything. And then also they need to name the people above them. So let's say you were a Navy SEAL somewhere on an operation. You can provide your information. This goes out. This means that your non-disclosure agreement is nullified. You can completely speak to this group and to me, notwithstanding that, because your non-disclosure agreement was predicated on a legal national security program. In reality, that was a sort of a head fake. It was a hoax. And your non-disclosure agreement is non-binding. You don't have to obey it because the programs you were attached to were themselves illegal and unconstitutional. Therefore, there is no national security cover for them. And this was, by the way, the assessment we reached in 1994 after I briefed the director of the CIA and people close to the president at the time, President Clinton, and other people in Congress, where it was made very clear to me they were being denied access. And I immediately concluded, and so did constitutional attorneys I spoke with, concluded that in fact those programs are illegal, and therefore all the paperwork, all the non-disclosure agreement, all the sort of, intimidation of operators and people who worked at Lockheed Skunk Works in Northrop, that goes away because those programs were being run illegally. It's basic law that if you're running an illegal operation, you can't then invoke the law to protect yourself, right? It's absurd. Let's use an analogy. Let's say you're, part of a mafia family and you're running a whole bunch of businesses and shell corporations doing criminal activity. Well, you might have signed a non-disclosure agreement with that company, but it's completely unenforceable because the underlying business was illegal, right? It's an unenforceable contract. So all of you guys who have signed and women who've signed these non-disclosure agreements, whether with military, corporation, intelligence agencies, whatever it is, shred them. They're absolutely unenforceable. Now, people will say, well, that's easy to say. How do we get protected? And for years, I would say, well, that's the law. We could always contest it. Now there's a pathway for you to be completely immunized. And in doing so, it also protects your pension, your retirement. If you're on and by the way, there have been a number of government and military, both civilian and military, who have said, I signed a 80-year non-disclosure agreement, and it clearly states that if I go outside that, I lose all my pensions and I'll be penniless. I'll be homeless on the street because I'm 70 years old or whatever. That's not the case now. So this is a very big development. It's kind of hard to overstate what a major breakthrough and development this has been. It's been evolving over the last couple of years, and now it's reached a much higher level. So I encourage people to do this and reach out to us and take this podcast and put it around all over the internet, because I've been specifically asked to help message this to people out there who follow this breaking development with disclosure and cooperate, because that's how this whole operation that's been illegal gets unwound and basically stopped, so that the worst plans they have, which are yet to come, can't be actuated, right? Because the very worst capabilities have not yet been fully applied. Yes, they've done, fake human abductions, they've done trafficking, they've done mutilations of animal and people, they've done all kinds of unconstitutional behaviors, they've embezzled over the years trillions of dollars from the Treasury, from various government departments and agencies, not just military and intelligence. We know from Catherine Austin Fitts, there was huge amounts of money going out of housing and urban development, right? You think had nothing to do with these black projects. Well, they do. They take that money and pull it out. So but the worst is the capabilities of what the final card is that they're planning to play. World War III, alien invasion, all kinds of other horrific things, in order to seize global totalitarian militaristic power. That's the 70-year plan. Werner von Braun spoke of it on his deathbed. I've had many, many people who have been in those programs operationally who have described what that is, and that the capability is fully in place to do it. The only way we prevent a disaster here is that people come together who understand what the stakes are. Even if you are not operating at that level of information, you are a cog in a machine that was illegal and doing these horrible things, and also have the worst plans that they're planning to do. So I think the only way to prevent this from becoming a catastrophe for us as a species, humans, is to get these capabilities wound down and stopped. There's a good shot at that now. I mean, it's a David and Goliath story. The David Small operation is the U.S. government, believe it or not. The Goliath is this huge transnational criminal organization that has technologies way beyond what the Secretary of Defense can deploy, or the normal national security apparatus is informed about. And this brings me to another point of this. Operational details, which we have learned and are continuing to learn about facilities and capabilities, those need to be disclosed. Why? Because otherwise, because there is a massive technology gap, deficit between the legal U.S. government and the illegal secret government, let's say, there's this huge technology gap. The only way to close that, first of all, it has to be known, which is we're working on informing key people of that. And secondly, it has to be known at such a detailed level that there could be ways to compensate for that I won't go into. So that kind of information is also very important. And we've been gaining more and more of that information as we have debriefed people who have been special forces operators and other people at key black site facilities. So all of that kind of information, someone may think that the sliver, because I know what the nature of compartmentalization is, and no one's got a huge picture, right? If they were an operator or in a lab or at a facility, you were working on a very narrow scope, right? And you were not even allowed to talk to people in the cubicle next to you. It's compartmented, highly compartmented. But our job is to then take all those pieces, I call this the disclosure mosaic I've spoken about before, and try to put together as complete a picture of not only what's going on, but where it's going on, who's doing it, what technologies they have, what are the locations specifically of operations, both corporate and governmental, that are doing these things. And I think not just here, but abroad. Because eventually this can certainly go OCONUS, outside continental United States. That is the plan. It's already being looked at. And it's one reason why I've been having meetings with people in over the years in Australia and Great Britain and the European Union, because this is not something restricted only to the United States. Primary focus right now is U.S. operations, but that is not going to be limited to that. So if you have information about operations in South America or Japan or Korea, Europe, anywhere in the world, that's important, because I can tell you that that has been what's been authorized, is that to go both CONUS and OCONUS. Continental United States and outside continental United States is CONUS and OCONUS. And that it makes sense, because what I advised is, you could get things under control in CONUS, and the whole rest of the world is now still, completely out of control with these sort of assets, technologies, basis of operation, et cetera, and so on. And all you have to do is look at what we've already put out for 25 years or more from people like Jonathan Wygant, who was at a remote site on the Peruvian-Bolivian border when we knocked down an ET craft, and it came down, and that craft was non-human intelligence, or ET, And that was retrieved, but he was threatened with being thrown out of a helicopter and killed for ever talking about it. Very courageous young man when he gave me that interview 25 years ago. And so that is the sort of information that's important, because there's a specific operation in a specific location. And it was under cover of a astronomy telescope, which was repurposed as a Star Wars weapon system. And they knocked down this ET craft, and the personnel there were all US, but it was in South America. So this is why we know these operations are not restricted to, and that's just one example of many, many, many we have. And that's why these operations are global. And this is why the OCONUS, the outside continental United States part, is important. And that's why we also need whistleblowers, witnesses, people who are involved with or saw, whether it was inadvertent or they were embedded in the operation. Those folks need to come forward. I will say that going down the road, not coming forward and cooperating with this, excuse me, is a liability for people keeping that secret. Most people view keeping the secret keeps them safe. I would argue at this point, keeping that secret is perilous, because you're on the wrong side of the law on something that's now picked up steam and at an official level, although very clandestine. And I think that people need to come forward because they can be protected and immunized, and they can help the world and the nation. But, doing nothing is actually going to be riskier than doing something right now, in my opinion. In fact, it's not my opinion. I know that to be the case. So I would say that before people start getting named by other whistleblowers, it would behoove them to come forward. That would be the smart way. Unless you're just a complete totalitarian fascist and a hardliner, and you don't want to, but that's at your own risk. But I think, frankly, 99% literally of everyone I have ever met with involved in these programs have been patriotic. They were doing their job. They were working for a corporation with national security clearances, or an intelligence agency, or the military. And they didn't know at the highest level that all those operations were being run by a criminal entity, a transnational criminal organization that has engaged in all kinds of horrific and illegal operations. So, but ignorance of that is not protective, because in a conspiracy, again, as I mentioned, we're not talking conspiracy theories and internet rubbish. We're talking like a RICO, racketeering influence corrupt organization. That bill was put into place really to round up things like the mafia and organized crime. But what has now become clear is that this is a very large organized criminal activity that's in both the corporate and private and governmental sectors here and abroad. That is, of course, what I've been saying for 35 years or 30 years. It's now, that conclusion has now been reached in official circles that I can't speak to, but high enough that this is now going forward at a very good pace.
Wow, that is so amazing, Dr. Greer. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll definitely encourage everyone to blast that out far and wide, especially to our brothers and sisters in the military who might be part of these programs.
Absolutely.
So the theme for this episode today is consciousness. And we tend to put the nuts and bolts of of this stuff over here, and then we put the spirituality piece over here, but really all of it exists in consciousness. So do you want to give us kind of the big picture of how consciousness fits into, well, everything, but how does it fit into this conversation?
Well, it really does fit, because the old tradition of spirit warriors from the Shambhala kingdom, who were highly conscious and enlightened, and who had great heart. Heart courage comes from the heart, the spirit, and a largeness of spirit and consciousness, and also real courage. Real courage isn't bravado and machismo. It's a spiritual state, honestly. And, I've been spending a lot of time with people who've been special forces and, Navy SEALs and Marines and special programs and Green Berets and what have you. And they all possess that, believe it or not. They're very, very spiritually minded. Now, but not necessarily religious, but in the sense that they have that a deeper spirit within them that is a very, very deep. And so everything that's happening with contact that we're doing with Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and people should get the CE5 Contact app and practice that. It's going to make a lot of more sense to you when you do, and then listen to this podcast. All of it is predicated on the understanding that the consciousness, the faculty of being awake at that deep level, some people call it spiritual, some people call it the God factor, some people call it, religious people would call that the Holy Spirit that is within all things. But that state of consciousness is what gives you the clarity of right action and the courage to go forward. I like that scene in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna is speaking to Arjuna before he's going out on a battlefield. And he says, a little of this, and the T in this is capitalized, a little of this eliminates all fear. What was he talking about? He was talking about that state of deep, transcendent, pure consciousness that is beyond space, time, death, all of it. So when you are in a state of consciousness in meditation, prayer, or just actualizing it and meditating on this, and you're operating from that level as opposed to an intellectual level, you're connected to something that's beyond your individual ego and self, and that is very powerful. And that is the wellspring of true courage. That is the wellspring of right action and guidance and intuition. So that's really the foundation of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Far from throwing out a lawn chair and saying and calling them in or summoning them like their servants at Downton Abbey, you're in a state of consciousness that is what Erwin Schrödinger said. When he said the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it's a singularity. And this is, I think, in 1908, where he was like the father of quantum mechanics, particle wave theory, technically, but he understood this non-locality, this entangled cosmos, but at the conscious level. And so the mind stuff, not what you're aware of, but the essence of being awake, the conscious faculty, that's what we're talking about. That is actually always infinite and always unbounded and omnipresent, which means it's operating at every point in space and time within yourself, but also beyond your individual self, beyond your ego, your body, what have you. It's the transcendent aspect, the pure form of the consciousness. And that is what Krishna was referring to. Now a lot of people, when they talk about consciousness studies, they're talking about what you're conscious of, like women's rights or racial equality or political idea. We're not talking about that. We're talking about consciousness itself, the faculty of being awake. And it's that simple. People make this very complicated. I like a Zen approach to this. Just think for a minute, you're hearing my voice, but you're awake. Now deduct my voice, take away your own individuality and your thoughts and your vision and all your senses, and just for a moment glimpse the awake self, that consciousness that's perceiving. That's all it is. But now realize that is infinite. That isn't bound by your body or your mind or your ego. This is how you can remote view, because your conscious self, your mind, is always integrated, even if you're not aware of it, to every point in space and time. This is why the whole cosmos has been described as a conscious hologram, where that's quantum, where every point in space and time and every dimension, not just physical, but other dimensions, are integrated through this field of consciousness. And most people get really abstractly confused. I said, it's so simple. This is why I tell people great exercise, sit and watch your breath, close your eyes and let the mind watch the breath, and then become aware of the consciousness itself and go deep into that silent consciousness. And we do this. I mean, actually, we're going to do this for 4 nights out under the stars on this cruise ship. I've never done this. It's an experiment, folks. But you guys, everyone who wants to join us, you can be part of a webinar. We're going to stream this live all over the world from the middle of the Caribbean for 4 of the 6 nights we're out there. And then during the day, for 2 days, while we're out at sea and not going to ports, we're going to be doing the whole teaching of this and training in remote viewing techniques and going through all the details and the cosmology and why CE5 contact works when you're in the correct frame of awareness and doing the correct practice. So if you want to be part of that, it'd be fun, because what I like the idea of is having hundreds of people doing this out in a pristine area in the middle of the ocean where it's so dark, away from any human civilization, except the ship. And then having that being done by people all over the world, where we create that change in consciousness, because really everything that happens in the world is first preceded by its vision and consciousness and thought and then action. So consciousness is very powerful, and it's really the prime mover, let's call it the prime force that causes evolution and change, positive change, to happen on Earth and other planets as well. Extraterrestrial civilizations 100% understand all this. And as some recent disclosures have come out from operators who have been involved in the psionic, work in classified projects to essentially hijack ET craft and knock them out of the sky, that's a very malignant use of non-locality of consciousness by people trained in that art. What we're doing is 180 degrees opposite. We're actually going out not to capture anything or to gain anything selfish. We're there as ambassadors to those civilizations, to those species. But what's the foundation of that? A lot of people can't find a meeting place for a Democrat versus a Republican, or someone of this race versus that race, or someone of this gender or that gender, or someone of this ethnicity or that ethnicity. We have thousands of years of war and millions of people killed over frivolity and stupidity. How are we going to become a civilization that can interact with non-human, conscious, intelligent civilizations from other star systems and worlds? The only way to get there, my friends, is to understand consciousness in its pure universal form, in its transcendent form that goes beyond the human. So it's transhuman, let's say. So it goes beyond just your human identity. But I always tell people, uniting the world around that we're all human would have been a great idea around World War I, right? But we blew through that over 100 years ago. Now, because of our proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, developing reverse engineered technologies to target ET craft, downing them, killing their personnel. Some of them are still living underground, trapped as prisoners, which people who are special forces call them refugees. Not quite, hardly refugees. They're prisoners of this horrific operation. And how are we going to go from this state of the world to the only way the world can survive? It is at its root a deeply spiritual consciousness realization. And I say spiritual as opposed to technically religious, because while within all religion is this teaching about spirituality, unfortunately, the outer form of religion becomes a cause of endless wars and conflict. If you doubt it, turn on your TV and see what's going on in the Middle East. And that's been going on for thousands of years. There's no end in that. unless humans go beyond their identities that are ethnic and even beyond their identity as a human and find the universal. What is that spark? What is that golden thread that weaves all intelligent life, in fact, all of the cosmos together, whether it be, intelligent life or not? It's this consciousness. It's this deep understanding of the essence of the conscious self. And I love that quote that says, he who knows his true self has known God. So they're not talking about they're not talking about me, Steve Greer, you, Michael, Ravens over here. No, we're talking about something that's transcendent to that, and yet is always within us.
That's so beautiful.
It's the means whereby we're conscious and awake. It's how we have our very being. It's been said that this is so close to our existence. It's like it's your life's vein. You don't even notice it. But if you stop, this is the power of meditation. If you stop with that knowledge I just shared and meditate and see the light of consciousness and become deeper and deeper and quiet, centered in that, then you realize that your individuality is simultaneously the unbounded. And that's how you can see remote places, go to remote places, go to the future, go to the past. Why? Because consciousness in its pure form is not limited by space or time, which means it's omnipresent across all points in space and dimensions beyond 3D, as well as all points in time. So this is the ultimate exploration. You want to be an explorer and adventurer, master your own consciousness. Realize what that consciousness is, and realize it's not just yours, that you are sort of a expression of this great spirit, of this unbounded aspect. But when you connect to that, which is not hard to do, people make it difficult. It's not hard to do. And once you learn that, you can be driving down the road and do it, and you see where the speed traps are with the highway patrol. I do this a lot. Haven't had a ticket in 50 years. Anyway, but and if you've driven with me, it's not because I'm always going slowly. But anyway,
it's one thing to understand this stuff intellectually, which we need to.
Yes.
It's another thing to actually experience it. And for years, I held the opinion that we're all connected through consciousness, et cetera. But I actually didn't really experience it until I committed to a meditative practice. And the difference between the two, between understanding and experience, it's like reading about sex versus actually having sex.
Right.
And that's always the example that I use, because it's visceral and people can understand how vast a difference that is.
Oh, it's huge.
So what is, there's so many different meditation techniques. Pardon?
How tantric of you.
Exactly, right? So there's so many meditation techniques out there. There's a mantra, there's following your breath, there's visualization, there's chanting. What is the best way to experience what you're talking about?
The best way is to first understand it, right? So knowledge is the greatest purifier. If you don't know what it is you're going to pursue, you're going to be just chaotically pursuing things that aren't going to be effective. That's step one. And most people skip over that and go straight to the forms of meditation. No, you have to understand what is the objective of meditation. And I liken this here. The analogy I use is that at the center of all of existence, life, space, time, matter, everything is this pure, unbounded field of conscious being. And let's say on Earth, we have 8 billion souls, 8 billion people. There's a spoke for each one of us into that unboundedness that's within us. It's folded within us. But I think each of those spokes are a little different. So I think the problem where you get into chauvinism and the beginning of ignorance is when someone has their technique and bombastically says, one size fits all, and therefore everyone has to do it. This is the beginning of a cult, right? So unfortunately, whether it's organizations, meditation groups, religions, Most of them start out with someone who understood this, and then lesser lights, I hate to say it, take it and turn it into a series of enforced rituals that everyone has to do identically the same, right? So that is a principle I'm trying to get across. Now, within that, there are techniques and approaches that have been used for thousands of years amongst humans that have a certain efficaciousness. They work, and they're tried and true. But I always say you make them your own. So I teach both a type of Zen Buddhist breathing meditation, a mantra meditation, visualization and remote viewing. And we do sometimes some kinds of chanting or musical things. Now, I would say to people, what I will share what I know has worked with lots of people. That's what we're going to do on the ship, April 6th to 12th. It's what's some of this, a couple of these techniques are in the CE5 contact app you can get for your phone. There are some long meditations in there. But then I tell people, don't do just exactly what I'm doing. Make it your own. So customize it and make it something that works for you. I remember teaching a woman meditation who was a medical doctor back in the early 90s in Los Angeles, who was part of an early CE5 team. And she was internal medicine. And she learned meditation, but then what she found she was a harp player, harpist, part-time, but very good. And the tones of the chords that she would hit with her mind would put her into this higher state of consciousness. And she could remote view, and she would have all these amazing experiences. And it was playing the harp, but it wasn't just technically playing the harp. It was conscious playing of the harp, right? I know people who have been athletes. Like when I would do very long mountain bike rides, which since I was almost killed 16 months ago on a mountain bike, I'm not on those now. I think my family would kill me if I got back on one. But I would be in this state, going up these long 12-mile grades up in the mountains. And I would get into this rhythm, and I would be doing sort of a meditation with the breathing and the exercise. And I would have these amazing experiences. So I know athletes who have done this as well. So, if there are 8
Is this
billion
the runner's high that I've heard
yes,
about?
it's a bit of the runner's high combined with being aware of the consciousness, at the same time. Now, of course, I had my eyes open. But even as a young child, I would practice walking on the beach at night with my eyes closed, meditating and sensing and seeing where anything would be. Even before I died. I had my near-death experience when I was 17, but this was even before that. I guess I was a strange child that way, but never walked off a cliff. But so there are all kinds of things you can do. And what I tell people, every moment of every day is an opportunity to engage the conscious mind, even if you're working, and connect to that while you're doing your task. And this grows as you begin to sit in meditation quietly and become familiar with the pathway from locality, your own ego and individual consciousness, to this quiet, deep, expanded state that is universal. But the more you travel that path regularly, and I think it should be done a couple, 3 times a day regularly, the more you do it in terms of, you are creatures of habit, the mind and the consciousness gets entrained, and it becomes easier and easier. I liken this to, like, if you're the first time you're driving to some place that you've never been to, and there are a whole bunch of turns and this and that, it seems like it takes forever, and it's you might miss the turns. And then the second time it's easier. The 100th time you do it, you're not even thinking. It's almost automaticity. You sort of automatically can get there. So let's use that as an analogy for conscious meditation practice. If you do it regularly and frequently and daily, then over a period of time, it opens an automaticity, a sort of automatic connection to that state that you can then begin to access even while you're awake, sleeping, driving, working, in all settings. So it's present. And if you need to, it becomes unpresent. That mindfulness you can bring to mind without going into the meditative state. But that's a process. It's an evolutionary process. So I think that and people say, oh, how long does that take? It can take you one time or your whole lifetime. Everyone's different. The other guidance I give on this is, that's the old saying, as ye have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be. And by faith here, I'm not referring to a blind belief in something unproven. I'm talking about this affirmative thought that you can do it. You believe you can do it. Now, I believe this is the crux of most people's failure in meditation. They think that, well, I can do it, or so-and-so can do it, or Guru X can do it, but they can't, right? And they diminish themselves because we're taught that by having sort of the idolatry of spiritual leaders. I'm not saying spiritual leaders shouldn't have respect. I'm just saying that we sort of give up all our power to them. That's the problem with the guru mindset. So what you really need to realize is that whether it was very enlightened masters or Christ, whoever, they all said, whatever state I have attained, so shall you. You can too. Now, you have to believe that about yourself. If you don't believe you can, you won't, right? Now, think of anything you've accomplished in life. If you wanted to be a film editor like you, and you sat there with the monkey on your shoulder going, I can't do this, I can't learn it, you wouldn't. But if you say you can, you will. So you have to affirm to yourself, you can not only do the meditation, but you can attain those higher states of consciousness and become centered and calm in that unbounded ocean of pure consciousness easily. If you believe you can, you will. If you have a negative thought saying you can't, you won't. So getting over your own self-doubt and diminishing of your own capabilities is key. And what they have found, in remote viewing and also experiments with random number generators, you could take an experienced meditator and they have an effect in that, but you could drag people off the street. Dr. Targ, who did a lot of the CIA remote viewing program, says we could pull people off the street, give them a few just affirmations they could do it, and instructions they'd sit and they would do it as well as people who we've been working with for a decade. So I think this is a very important thing to realize, is that we sell ourselves short, right? We all do this typically. I certainly did as a child and to a certain point. And I think it helped that I died and had that near-death experience and came back. But in an odd way, I'm on my 14th near-death experience after the last week. But anyway, I almost died. Always 2 weeks ago today, I had that rupture of my appendix. By the way, that was terrible. We got the path report back. Oh my God. Miracle I didn't die. But.
Well, to bring this full circle,
Yes.
when I first started following your work many years ago and waking up to the scale of the cover-up and what has been robbed from us, it's very natural, and I certainly fell into it, to just have tremendous hatred for the people who have been keeping this a secret. But if we're being called to find oneness with extraterrestrials, that I guess we have to find oneness with the people who have been behind the cover-up.
Absolutely.
And the people who continue to be disinformation agents out there. And listen, I'm very guilty. Just look at my Twitter of getting mad all the time and being a low consciousness jerk all the time. So how can we work to solve this problem and fight disinformation and call out the people who are lying, but still maintain that? Because this is something I struggle with, and I'm sure a lot of people do. How can we maintain that commonality with them in consciousness?
The key thing, yes, it's a great question. And I don't have a problem with it, because I always say you can walk and chew gum. All right? You can walk and chew gum. So what's the walking part? You can be in this state of consciousness and be doing it for the right reasons for the earth, the future of humanity, etc., and be a warrior standing up to wrong action, evildoers, liars, misinformation, disinformation operatives. But it doesn't mean that you're not connecting that. Or I was asked this recently on a podcast. I have no hate for the disinformation people out there, and people even who have done terrible things to me and people on my team. Because but I will resist them. I will speak truth to power. But that also comes from higher consciousness. But when the day is done, the key thing is they at a deep level, you can be forgiving. You don't forget, you forgive. Now, a lot of this was sort of formative in my childhood. I was neglected and abused and starved. But by the time I became a teenager, I had my own apartment in high school. And then I learned to forgive my parents, both of them, and to help them. Now, I have siblings who held on to that hatred and whatnot to this day. But it's actually very liberating to forgive. So, to me, one of the great things is it's not hard to love. It's much harder to forgive those who have wronged you or the world or what have you. Now, forgiving them doesn't mean giving them a pass to continue destroying the planet, right? So it's a balance. But ultimately, and this is why I use this term spirit warrior, you're doing this for the benefit of the world and the future, and you can be strong against those who are taking the world, over a cliff. But it doesn't mean that you have to hate them. It doesn't mean you have to not have the capacity to forgive them. And this actually translates into policy. So let's put a button, a alpha and omega beginning and end here for this podcast. One of the things I recommended, and it's very funny to go through our archive and look at my recommendations to the Clinton administration in 94, 5, 6. They haven't changed in 30 years. And it's not that I'm not capable of any sort of, evolution of thought. But even then, I said, an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind here. This is why the bill that got killed in December of 23, that came out of the Senate Intelligence Committee unanimously, and then the Senate overwhelmingly, but was killed in the House, had a safe harbor amnesty, let's call it forgiveness, part of it. That's what we're offering now. It's, in a sense, everything you've done you can be immunized, and it can be forgiven, like from a policy, legal, prosecution point of view, but you've got to come clean. You've got to get on the right side of this. You have to disclose everything. But within that is, in a sense, an act of forgiveness, because, if your view is you just go after people aggressively and you don't give them an exit ramp, and particularly in this situation where they're holding fierce technologies that are way advanced to anything that the president can currently deploy, or the Secretary of Defense, or whoever, it's not wise to take this to the point of mutual assured destruction. The wise path would be, here's an exit ramp, right? And take it, for God's sakes. It's being offered. But that, in a sense, is an act of, let's call it policy forgiveness. It's a legal forgiveness, right? Pardon. The word pardon is used. It's not a presidential pardon, but this is done, by the way, in prosecutions all the time, where, people who cooperate to help right a terrible wrong are pardoned or given immunity, or forgiven, if you want to use that term, for whatever they've done, so long as they fully cooperate. So fully. Now, and that's the requirement. So in a way, that is something that has always been part of what we've recommended for two reasons. One is, nothing is going to be good is going to come out of just, trying to do a scorched earth policy, number one. Number two, many of the people who got trapped in that system were innocent when they started, right? and then got pulled in to increasingly rogue and criminal operations. And by the time they realized they were in there, they were already had, and they knew that they could be, blackmailed to stay on that path. That's currently the case of a number of very senior operations with corporate and intelligence I know personally about. They can blackmail them. They have them. So here's what we do. Okay, oh, that person, they have this on that person. They have this dirt. Wipe it clean. Immunity, forgiveness. Now they cooperate, right? Now there are people who don't agree with that. They really want to get a pound of flesh out of some folks. And look, there is a place for justice, and there is a place for that, and even retribution. But you got to be careful with this, because you're not like just taking on a bunch of buffoons in the Nuremberg trials, right? You're taking on folks who have technologies reverse engineered from interstellar vehicles that are thousands of years very advanced. And there's no point burning down the whole barn to get rid of these rats, right? So we have to be wise about this. And this is what I've been recommending for 30 plus years. So I think now it's actually being put into place. What's exciting is that it literally is being put into place right as we're speaking, which I think is very good. I hope it leads to the outcome we all are hoping and praying for.